Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get started, again, could we just do a quick bit of housekeeping? And if you can hear me and if you can see the session 9 slide on the screen, can you just type hello into the chat box so that I know you can hear us and see us? Thank you, Wendy. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Helen. Thank you, Sue. Oh, and thank you, Mary. Okay, I see everybody there now. All right, thank you very much, and welcome to session 9. I think that we are all here this afternoon except Dale Taylor. Dale didn't think that she was going to be able to join us today, but she said that if her schedule changes and she gets away a little bit earlier, that she will be here with us to at least be here for part of the session. So we are going to be 5 today instead of 6. Again, the same housekeeping applies to this session as we've used in all the other sessions. We are going to ask you generally to keep your webcam off and your microphone muted unless we're doing a discussion. If you need to contact us at any time, just type an asterisk into the chat box. And just to let you know, we will be recording this session and it'll be available for you to view afterward. Today's session does involve both all of us working online together through GoToMeeting, and we are going to ask you to use your second devices to do some smaller group work today. Today's pairings are going to be Wendy and Helen and Sue. Sue, I want you to move up to that top group, and then Carmen and Mary. I know that Sue and Helen are at the same school, but it looks like you're on separate machines today, so I don't know if you're in the same place or if you're both joining from Hillingdon, but on your own computer. So yeah, hopefully it'll work out. If it doesn't, maybe you can kind of move to the same location and make that paired discussion a little bit easier. Before we get started today is session 9 is our last session. Does anyone have any questions before we get started today? So questions from anything from session 1 to 8, although I don't know that I can promise to remember everything from session 1 to 8, or anything that you thought of as you were preparing for today's session. All right, I don't see any questions right now, but again, keep in mind that if you have questions at any time during the session, just type an asterisk into that box, and we will either contact you via the chat box or using the microphone. This is session 9. It's the last session in this online action research course. I know that all of you probably remember that when we started the course, it was meant to have 10 sessions, and the last 2 sessions have been combined into a new session 9. So in the past, we did an entire session on data interpretation, and we did a separate session on reporting action research results. And what we have done for this session is that we focused more on the data interpretation, but we're going to talk a little bit about reporting action research. And again, I know that you have sensed in the past, in the last several sessions, that the material has become much more conceptual because, again, we're not actually doing an action research process. And for that reason, it may make much more sense to spend a little bit less time talking about reporting action research since we haven't actually done an action research project. Just like the other sessions, we're going to start out today with a short content video reviewing the things that you have read and done.
Hello, and welcome to session 9, the last session in this Getting Started with Action Research course. In the previous session, we discussed data analysis, and you completed a thematic analysis activity. This week, we'll be discussing data interpretation and action research reporting. Let's begin with data interpretation. Data interpretation is the process of making sense of the qualitative and quantitative data that has been collected and analyzed at each stage of the action research process. In most cases, this involves data triangulation. As a reminder, qualitative data is typically text-based and is derived from written responses or transcripts of audio or video recordings of interviews, focus groups, or lessons. Quantitative data is typically numbers-based and comes from scaled survey responses and academic assessments. In an action research project, you will collect initial baseline data, formative data to inform the implementation of the intervention, and summative data to understand the outcomes of the intervention. At each of these stages, you may have collected both qualitative and quantitative data, and that data could have reflected the experience of students, collaborating teachers, parents, or other participants. Data interpretation involves a review of all the data you collected at all the stages of the action research project from all the participants. In this review, you are looking for both patterns in the data and outliers, atypical outcomes. When developing written descriptions of your data interpretation, it is important to use precise language. For example, in most cases, the data will suggest, support, or demonstrate a certain outcome. Data does not prove a certain outcome. Similarly, when referring to self-reported survey data, you should qualify the data by using language like respondents reported, rather than definitively attributing the assessed quality or behavior to all the individuals in that particular cohort or group. Remember that action research generates practical knowledge that is relevant to the participants, rather than generalizable knowledge that is relevant in similar situations involving others outside your participant group. You will summarize your data interpretation in the conclusion. Important questions to consider when writing the conclusion include the following. Will you continue with the intervention? Be sure to use data to support why you will or will not do this. If you will continue with the intervention, will you make any modifications? Be sure to use data to support your reasons for any changes. Again, if you decide to continue with the intervention, will it be effective for all the students in your current or future classes? Or is it more effective for a certain kind of student? Be sure to use data to support your judgment. And finally, what did you learn about yourself as a teacher or education leader? Again, be sure to use data to support your reflection. In some cases, you may write a formal action research report as a record of your activities. The audience for the report will determine the reporting format and style. For example, if the report is intended as a formal record of your action research for use within your school, the format and style may range from informal to formal. But if you think that external audiences will be interested in your results, or if you plan to share your work through conference presentations, public blogs, or articles for professional publications, your report should be more formal. If you are planning to prepare a written report or article for a specific publication, be sure to check with the publisher's submission guidelines. Most action research reports include information under 5 headings. We have seen these headings in some of the published action research reports we've read as part of this course. The first heading is Introduction. This section describes the researcher's context, the problem the researcher is trying to understand and address, and the researcher's experience and interest in this form of structured professional inquiry. The second heading is Literature Review. This section describes information related to your research question that has been published in the academic literature. This may include theoretical frameworks and past work related to the research question that both supports and challenges the approach or intervention you have chosen. The third heading is Methods. This section describes how you will identify and involve the participants, collect baseline, formative, and summative data, ensure process validity, implement the intervention, and analyze the data. The Methods section is often organized chronologically. The fourth heading is Findings and Discussion. This section reports the major findings and provides illustrative examples from the data. This section is often organized using subheadings that reflect the themes or topics that emerge from the data. This section should avoid making general statements and reflect the practical nature of action research. The fifth and final heading is Recommendations. This section explains the study's significance for the researcher's professional practice and for the participants, including the students. This section also states new questions that emerged from the study, as well as plans for continuing this line of inquiry. As with other stages of the action research process, asking a colleague to provide constructive feedback improves the outcome validity of your report. It also helps ensure that readers unfamiliar with your situation will understand your report. Sharing the professional knowledge arising from your action research experience can be rewarding and instrumental in your own continued professional development. Look for appropriate opportunities to write articles or present your work at professional gatherings. We hope that this introduction to action research methods has provided useful information for helping you structure your self-directed professional growth. And again, thank you for your interest in action research.
Okay, we're going to move on immediately to the first paired discussion. And for the paired discussion, what I would like you to refer to is your Learning Log 9.1 and 9.2. When you were preparing for today, the recommendation was that you would complete Learning Log 9.1, respond to the questions, the 5 questions, and then go to Learning Log 9.2. And again, there were questions at the end of that Learning Log. Today, the questions that you're going to be discussing come from Learning Log 9.2. They're the questions that appear on page 2 of that Learning Log. And there are 6 questions there. We're going to break them down into 3 groups. And I'm going to ask you first to consider the first 3 questions. And the questions from that Learning Log are: what is the answer to the research question based on the data? What were the intended or unintended consequences of the study? And how did the researchers' understanding of the topic, their teaching, and their students change? I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this first paired discussion. We will change the screen and let you know when there are 5 minutes remaining, and then again when there are 2 minutes remaining. And then when we all come back together, we're going to ask you to open your video and your audio, and we'll go through the questions one at a time and ask you to please share some of the things that you talked about in your paired discussion. Again, the pairings for this afternoon are going to be Mary and Carmen, and Sue, Helen, and Wendy in the second group. As soon as you're ready, go ahead and contact or link up with the people who you're discussing the questions with. And again, we'll let you know when there are 5 minutes left and then 2 minutes left. Please go ahead and get started. Cam and your microphone so that we can all see one another. Change the slide. These questions are at the bottom of your Learning Log 9.2, so if they do cover the screen, don't worry, you can still see the questions at the bottom of your Learning Log. Yeah.
We can't see it because it's behind this. Do you want to?
Yeah. So if that shrinks down, that's okay. Yeah. Again, we're going to shrink the screen so that we can see all of your video and audio.
Well, I'm going to bounce out the way because we don't want to cat sounds.
So we're still waiting for, there's Sue and Helen. Hey guys.
So we're waiting for Mary.
Mary. Yeah, we're just waiting for Mary now.
And here she comes.
Hi, Mary.
Oh, we need to put the cat sounds,
Yep, that's fine. All right, so before we start, I just wanted to, as a quick reminder, kind of remind us of what the research question was from this article. And again, the article was called The Effective Technology on Enthusiasm for Learning Science. And this was an action research report that was actually published by a group in southeastern Florida, where they were encouraging teachers to engage in action research. So this is an example of someone's piece of work that they prepared for publication in a professional, an association type of journal rather than a peer-reviewed journal. Again, just to kind of qualify kind of the amount of kind of review that this article was subject to prior to being published. So the research question was, how does the use of HyperStudio in a 6-week science unit on oceanography affect middle school students' eagerness to participate in science activities, both in and outside school. And remarkably, this particular researcher collected a huge range of data. And again, I just wanted to kind of go through that list quickly. I know that you will have read all of this and noticed all of this. He collected pre and post student surveys, asking specific questions about their enthusiasm for science and the extent to which they were working on science projects outside the classroom. He did a pre and post parent survey, again, asking parents about what they observed their children talking about and doing that was science related at home. He solicited written feedback comments both from students and from parents. He observed specifically problems students encountered when using the technology. He did observations looking for problems that students were encountering with science content, and also observations looking for problems that students encountered when working in a group, because all of those things were part of this particular intervention. He also brought in attendance and tardiness data, which he collected routinely. So he's using data, not just data that he's collecting specifically for the project, but data that he collected routinely as a classroom teacher. And finally, there were a number, he made a number of observations that had to do with time on task and the kind of students' attentiveness to the task and their reluctance to leave at the end of a class period and their willingness to stay after instead of joining other kinds of social activities. Those things I can only assume were recorded in like a teacher reflective journal, because he's not really indicated where that data came from, although he seems to have collected it in some systematic way. So that was the research question, data collected from a whole range of sources. At the end of Learning Log 9.2, we had these 3 questions. What is the answer to the research question based on the data? What were the intended or unintended consequences of the study? And how did the researchers' understanding of the topic and their teaching and their students change? And if we could start with question 1, and we're going to just open your microphones. All right, go ahead and open your microphones. And anyone who'd like to just kind of tell us a little bit about what you discussed in your paired discussion with question 1, just go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'll start again.
Hi, Carmen. Thank you.
Hello. I discussed this with Mary, and our conclusion was that obviously the enthusiasm in learning science grew, adopting the technology. However, it seems to have grown only in the classroom, not outside the classroom. If anything, the researcher noticed that outside the classroom has decreased. For me, I think it's a good thing in a way that the parents noticed it actually increased at home and outside the classroom. But obviously, the researcher says also that from the discussions, the parents noticed that the students are more interested in science. However, I mean, obviously, it's not in the study, but I'm wondering if this is a good thing, because it seems the communication between the students and the parents probably increased. I don't know. I get that when my son is very enthusiastic about something, I get a lot about it. So, and it's a different type of communication. So. Yeah.
Carmen, thanks. And I think actually you actually began answering question 2, which has to do with intended and unintended consequences. And again, you've kind of read into this that one of the unintended consequences is that it actually increased communication between parents and their students about what they were doing in science class, because that communication had a purpose in this case, because the teacher was engaging both the parents and the students in the research project. Thank you for that. Can we go on to question 2? I mean, that was a great kind of summary of question 1. What other intended or unintended consequences did people observe or infer based on this particular, on the research report? And again, just go ahead and speak. Go ahead, Sue or Helen.
For me, it gave me more questions than it did answers, because we didn't know it's very difficult when you're asking for what people are doing outside of school as to what else is going on. If they were rushing to lunch after the science class, maybe they were going to try and leave earlier. Therefore, they would look less enthusiastic about what they'd just done than if they were, say, going to walk 7 steps to or 7 staircases to the art room. So there was, although the research seemed, the evidence seemed to suggest that what he wanted to find out, he found out. And I would say that, yes, the enthusiasm did increase. There was so much we didn't know to help that. So to have repeated it or to have done it at a different time of the year, he kind of seemed to me, or we were talking, have made the research work for what he wanted it to do. And that I thought was kind of a bit disappointing. And maybe he went on to do other things, but it left me with more questions than actually I felt that the research showed. I don't know if anyone I know, felt the same.
I was thinking that if we go on to question 2 though, as well, I think for me, one of the main unintended outcomes was the fact that there was so much interest from the faculty. There was growth in collegiality between the staff. And I think it can be, it was good that it can actually be extended across the curriculum.
And Wendy and I were talking that when we read the article, obviously Hyper Studio was a number of years ago, and obviously technology was very new. So whenever you introduce when technology was introduced, it did suddenly capture younger people's imagination, and therefore it was almost a piece of research in that time that I think might not be repeated in the same way today. And today it would be not whether the enthusiasm for science inside and outside the classroom went up with technology, but more whether or not by flipping the classroom, the engagement could be more. So it's I think it just shows that you've got to be careful with any research questions. There is a period of time when they are relevant, and there's a place where they're relevant. I think that's what this article did for me more than anything else, was it kind of embedded for me. You needed to know more. You needed to know the time it was done, when it was done, a bit more detail, I think. Yeah.
And the fact that action research questions are of that time, of the moment, that it's something that to help you at the time with your teaching, and to really help your students in their learning. I think so, because it will be of its time. It has to be an immediate thing. It has to be something that's going to have a direct impact on what you're doing at that time.
And going on to one of the further questions, one of the unintended consequences was he became much more energized about teaching science again. And that was the biggest kick for me. Actually, the students was one thing, because you can't control that, but he became rekindled. And I think that was the win for the research. Students, they'll come and they'll go, but if you can get re-enthused for it, then that actually would lead on and help all your groups as far as you go. Probably enough from Hillingdon at the moment, but we'll mute again for a sec.
No, guys, thank you very much. I just wanted to kind of reinforce what you said about action research is really about research in the moment. And what we're looking at here is a single research cycle. And we don't have any idea what questions this raised for the teacher and what things he may or may not have done next. Sue, I think the other thing that you touched on was this idea of the introduction of this technology and how it kind of re-energized him as a teacher. From a research perspective, one of the really interesting questions is, was this a question about, was he actually researching or collecting data on technology, or was this a more general question on the role of novelty? Whenever you introduce something new, when you get more excited about it because you've never done it before, your students get more excited about it because they've never done it before. And especially if it's something that is, that you've selected well, that novelty can have a really powerful effect and can in fact bring about a lot of unintended consequences, like the type that we saw here. But again, we're just looking at one of his research cycles. He may have come up with that question on his own. Said, well, what if I went back and looked at Hyper Studio 6 months from now, when I've been using it on and off for 6 months and it's no longer a novelty? Does it still have this effect? So guys, thank you for that. Does anyone else want to add to question 2, unintended or intended consequences? All right, well, let's go to question 3.
I mean, obviously,
Go ahead.
sorry, I mean, I don't know anything about science and the program that was used, because I've never used it. But I think an unintended consequence we're talking about was the increase in use of technology for students, which again, nowadays we go back and we say, yes, you use it, but at some point you have to stop, and you have to, especially when they go home, it's like, not too much, get off your iPad, get off your laptop, get off. So the unintended one was, increasing the use of technology for students, probably outside the classroom as well.
Yeah.
So.
And it possibly, just leading up to that, it could actually have led to a student's dissatisfaction with other courses that weren't using the technology. We don't know about that because he was only looking at science. But did this actually have a negative effect on their engagement in other subjects where they didn't have access to this kind of thing?
Yeah.
Wendy, go ahead. We can't hear you, Wendy. Is your microphone on?
Sorry.
There we go.
But there was, the other teachers seemed to want training, and they became engaged off the enthusiasm of the students and the teachers. So I do still think it's a novelty factor in this case, but yeah, it was nice to see that transition outside of the science.
Yep. And again, we don't know all the unintended consequences, but again, following on from that, it could be that teachers in a school where probably the use of technology was relatively rare, just because there weren't that many different pieces of software you could use, that this may have actually, those other teachers, having seen students being excited about technology, may have actually investigated other technologies as well as a way to kind of follow up on the enthusiasm and interest they were seeing from students. Let's go on to question 3. How did the researchers' understanding of the topic, the researchers' teaching, and their students change? So could you tell by reading this piece if the researcher actually had different ideas about the topic, their teaching, or their students at the end of the piece in comparison with what they had at the beginning? And again, just go ahead and speak and we'll...
We had, so talking to Mary, we had two points. First, Mary said that definitely the students changed by using technology, but we don't know if they change and they're enthusiastic about science because they're using the technology, or because, they're very excited about using the technology in general, or because the use of technology, they understand more of science and they are happy to, to progress with what they're doing in science and to work on that. The second point that I personally made, I know I go to other classes where, obviously being a PE teacher, their communication is the key in PE, and they have to talk all the time, they have to collaborate, they have to work together. But the teacher here at the end said, I found myself looking forward to the hectic pace and the commotion that resulted from all this process. So I find the same when I go to other classes. As I said, the teachers are, you have to be quiet, you have to listen, where for me talking it's the key. So it's just probably a change for the classroom teacher.
Mm-hmm. Great, Carmen. Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to add anything to question 3? Okay. Well, what we'll do now is we will go to question 4, 5, and 6. And again, those are the same questions that appear on Learning Log 9.2. So you have the questions there. We'll put the screen back up in a moment. We're going to ask you to turn off your video and audio. And in a moment, we're going to ask you to kind of rejoin your groups. And again, you'll have 10 minutes. We will change the screen when there is 5 minutes remaining. and we will come online live and tell you when there are 2 minutes left. So again, if you turn off your audio and video and rejoin your group using whatever method that you have used the first time, and we'll Hi, welcome back, everybody. Again, if you would you please go ahead and open your video and audio.
There's no people joining.
All right, welcome back, everybody. And again, we're looking at questions 4, 5, and 6. And question 4, what should the researcher do differently based on these findings? So this question really is about your, if you were doing this piece of research, what might you have done differently? Or if you would have carried out this piece of research, what new questions would have emerged? And actually, that's question 5. It kind of pulls question 4 or 5 together. So again, if you'd like to respond to either question 4 or 5, just go ahead and speak whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I was interested in the communication gap that they highlighted between the students and the parents, and would like to know more how that gap can be bridged, and how the enthusiasm at school can be transferred to the home environment. So I'm not sure how I'd do that, but that's an aspect that would be interesting to explore.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Anyone else?
I would be interested in looking and probably putting today's eyes on the situation that was in the past, but on the flipped learning, to see whether or not get the students to create resources for the next class at home or in another area, to see whether or not their enthusiasm for the in-class, because it seemed to be that he didn't get the outside of school built up. So to try and focus on that a little bit more, rather than just focus on the enthusiasm within the class. But also, as I said, repeat exactly the same project with another group, either at another time of the year or when I knew where the kids were going after me. It was very nice to say that 17 didn't want to go and play basketball against the teachers or sit and watch that game. But what did that show? That maybe the gym was cold and there wasn't any free food on that day. And maybe if there had been, that would have caused a difference. So, it's more putting it into a different time, and maybe even a different project. Maybe the Under the Sea project was actually really exciting and they really wanted to do that one. Maybe if they were doing the solar system, it might not have been as exciting, and therefore the enthusiasm of the kids. So if you were only looking at the enthusiasm of the kids, I think it needed to be done at a different time and with a different project. Content. Anything to add? Nope. Okay. Yeah. That's us.
And so, of course, what you were doing is that you were noticing that there were a whole range of variables that were involved in this research project. And you were trying to think, how can I actually test separately for all those variables? Because one of the challenges of action research is that you don't control for those variables, that you recognize that this is messy because this is what happens in the classroom every day, which is always messy. But in order to, if you were actually trying to generate knowledgeable that was moving away from the practical and to the generalizable, you would need to ask questions about all of those variables to understand the role that they played in the result that you got. So, thank you very much for that. What else? Did anyone else have any ideas of what they would do differently or new questions? Mary?
I would just take up from where Wendy and Sue have said already about a kind of hecticness in the classroom and trying to translate that into the gap between what they do at home and what they do at school. There's a tendency when technology isn't being used to perhaps assume that the behavior in the class is going to be different, quieter, or more attentive, or listening. But perhaps the researcher could have really looked into using that mayhem and chaos to develop some kind of non-technology based aspect to planning something. before use of something like a flipped classroom, as Sue was suggesting, so that they appreciate that planning can also be part of what they consider to be science, because they seem to have divided it. And as a teacher of science, you understand that it's all part of the same thing, but developing the same appreciation for the person-to-person interaction as opposed to the IT-mediated interaction is just as important. So that might be an avenue the researcher could have looked into as well.
Great. And Mary, probably, I don't know, that it sounds like maybe one of the things that you might have noticed is in this particular case, I don't think that I noticed that the researcher actually used academic achievement data against the findings of the enthusiasm data. So we don't actually know if they learned more science or learned science better by using this technology. All we know is they were a lot more excited about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think students that are very good at it find a confidence in hiding behind it as well. So trying to draw them away from the computer screen to do the same job is a challenge, and really involves more than just the usual didactic or teacher-led learning.
Yeah.
Start to something that it's almost like you'd encourage the class to teach the teacher.
Yeah.
And give them in some way a leadership with it, and take the computers out of the equation until they get the same confidence that they do from behind a screen.
Yeah.
And I've tried this on a small level with a couple of my classes, and I've seen how enthusiastic they get for it. And it tends to match what they do when they're interacting online. And that may just be the group I've got, because they are a very collaborative crowd anyway. But it would be interesting to see, as you say, if the data matches the enthusiasm scores. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think what you're saying also relates back to what Sue said earlier. That this is a piece of action research that was of its time, and it does. There's a big kind of element of the impact and effect of novelty in teaching, and of course at the time, when all these software pieces were brand new, that no one had ever seen anything like them before, that teachers became as kind of excited about the novelty as the students did. And it would have been very easy to have been swept into that without actually asking those bigger questions about the learning outcomes, and about what kind of moving in this direction, how that from a long-term perspective actually shifts kind of students' expectations of, to what extent is being in a classroom, to what extent do you expect a kind of entertainment or a kind of, engagement, that looks more like perhaps a game than like, traditional teaching, and how does that play into how you address, the needs of the learners who may have that as an expectation. Certainly, people have looked at that in both directions and said, right, well, how can we turn science into a gaming activity, in order to kind of take advantage of this enthusiasm. But yeah, it's always interesting to look at a piece of research that is as old as this piece, where we all can remember that time. And probably, I certainly was swept up in the, what can we do with technology in the classroom? And it was all about the technology much more than being, concerned about the learning or the other bits.
Yeah. There's a balance, I think, and it would be interesting to see how it would match.
Great. Does anyone else want to respond to question 4 or 5? So I'm going to move on to question 6, and to the extent, so question 5 on Learning Log 9.1 asked you to kind of just draft a really short discussion or conclusion for this research piece based on the earlier parts, and then to compare it to what the author actually said. And I don't know if any of you actually did that paragraph, but certainly as you were reading through that Learning Log 9.1, you were developing kind of an idea about what the researcher was getting out of it. And I'm just wondering again, when you actually did read the discussion, which was, after you did the first set of questions, were there some things that surprised you, or some things that maybe you didn't notice when you read through that the researcher noticed, or things that after you read the first bit, you couldn't actually see what the researcher was drawing on in order to make kinds of remarks or conclusions or discussion points? So the question is framed as, what similarities or differences are there between your response to question 5 and the researcher's discussion? And again, I'll just open it up, and whenever you'd like to speak, just go ahead and start.
Obviously, the enthusiasm has grown, but I think I was talking to Mary earlier. Depends a lot on the, like Sue said as well. Depends a lot on the unit that was taught, and the response might be different if the person would teach another unit. Also depends, I think, on the application that they are using, because there might be applications they are not very familiar with, or they don't like the way they are, and the enthusiasm might not grow in the same way. I've noticed in the PE class, we try to use iPads in the PE class, and all they want to do is just want to run around and let out some steam. So every time you ask them to film something and to see if that was correct and compare it to another image, or they just go, oh, again, I just want to run, I just want to do this, I just want to. So depends what subject, what unit, what the application is as well.
Great. No, thank you for that. And again, one of the things we hadn't talked about up until now, even with questions 4 and 5, was the role that this actual piece of software played, that not all software is created equal. And for whatever reason, this piece of software really appealed to this particular group of students. Yeah, interestingly, we know today that when we think about using technology, that we always want to know, do the boys in my class respond to this piece of technology the same way that the girls in my class respond to it? But certainly back at this point when this piece was done, people weren't beginning to, some of those trends hadn't really emerged that there, could quite possibly be gender differences in terms of enjoyment and engagement with these things. But yeah, the quality of the software and the task involved. Anything else that you noticed that was something that was different that the researcher reported versus kind of the impressions that were being built in your mind as you read through the first part?
Yeah, I found that I had a very different perception of the student and the parent survey than when it came out in the discussion. I had to go back and reread it because I hadn't really taken on board from the data how, especially the parents' responses, how they differed. So I put more weight on the fact that the students' enthusiasm had grown, but it did make me go back and reread it because I kind of had missed that in the first time.
Yeah. And I think that certainly because the author focused on that as the opening paragraph in that discussion piece, that Wendy, I think you're absolutely right. I had the same experience when I was reading. When I read that through the first time, I thought that I wasn't even thinking that was the pattern that he was going to be talking about, was the difference in teacher perceptions or in student perceptions versus parent perceptions. I didn't take that away from just looking at the numbers in the data charts. Anything else? All right, if it's okay, we are going to move on. We have one more kind of bit of today's session that I wanted to touch on. So I'm going to go ahead and, for the time being, turn off your audio and video, and I'm going to put the big screen back up because we're going to watch another short video clip in just a moment. But before we do that, I know that in the short introductory video, I talked about some of the section headings for a typical action research report, including the introduction, the literature review, the methods, the findings and discussion, and the recommendations and their implications. And certainly in the example that we just read, the headings there were slightly different. And some of the earlier kind of action research reports that we read follow this format a little bit more closely. The point that I want to make is that these are suggested headings, and the headings that you choose for a report, whether it's a report that's written formally or informally, really will depend on who your audience is. Again, in that short introductory video, I did mention the fact that many teachers will undertake a piece of action research with the idea that it may be something that they publish. And when it comes time to actually writing a report, if you are thinking about submitting a report, whether it's to a professional publication that is not peer-reviewed, or in some cases, we have had one of our projects that has gone to a peer-reviewed submission. What you'll want to do is you'll actually want to look at the submission guidelines that have been prepared by the publisher of those materials, and that will help you really decide how you want to organize your report. In a moment, I want to show you a very, very different way of reporting an action research project, and I know that Sue will say, well, I've done one of those as well. One of the things we don't often think about is that action research can be formal or informal, and the reporting can be both formal and informal. And one of the informal ways that you can report your action research is through the representation of the project in video format. Jake Roche and Brianna Gray were one of our very first SIM project teams, and they ran a project called Talking in Class, which looked at the role of student dialogue in student learning. And they produced their action research report in the form of a video, which became one of the elements in their Talking in Class ebook, which is still available to download for free from iTunes. If there's anyone who hasn't seen a copy of it, I would encourage you to do it, because above and beyond just being a great teaching resource, it's a great example of how to take the action research process and represent it in an electronic format. And again, I know Sue has a fantastic piece as well, which many of you would have seen on the work that her school did on becoming an Apple school. So we're going to take just a quick look at Jake and Brianna's video that they put together that summarizes their action research process. While you're watching this, I actually want you to listen for and see if you can tell when they're talking about materials that would have gone in an introduction, when they're talking about the literature, when they're describing their methods, when they're describing their findings, and when they're presenting their recommendations.
Hi, I'm Jake Ross.
And I'm Brianna Gray, and we're both teachers at ACS International School in the UK.
We recently led an action research project on increasing the quantity and quality of student-to-student dialogue in the classroom, and now we're beginning to use those results to train and support other teachers.
Well, our research and results have been published in an interactive ebook, and that includes a lot of video footage of our work, so that might be the best way to explain our project, and starting with an introduction to our project team. When selecting teachers to be members of the project team, we tried to find people who would encompass every grade level and subject area. So we do have teachers who teach grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. We have 2 math teachers, an IT teacher, a science teacher, and a world cultures teacher on our team.
I'm an EAL teacher. Our student population is made up of more than 50% non-native English speakers, most of whom spend most of their time in mainstream classes. So I was interested in increasing the academic language use in those mainstream classes.
And my background is in special education and technology, so I've always been interested in differentiation and student-centered learning, and I think we were both interested in using video as a tool for reflection.
Well, I came across some research from Stanford and the California public school system that showed increasing structured speaking activities, student-to-student dialogue activities, greatly increased student achievement. So we wanted to see how we could apply that to our international school setting.
We decided to film the process so that we could more accurately determine the impact on both the teachers and the students. So we have a video summary of our methodology. Teachers agreed to attend the one-day workshop and then develop activities based on the web course skills to use in their classroom. They completed a pre-interview, they implemented the activity and allowed us to come into their classroom and film. They completed a post-interview, and they also participated in some of our surveys.
From each one of the teachers' classes, we asked a student to participate in the study. the students agreed to do a pre-observation interview where they gave us their thoughts on student-to-student dialogue in the classroom. Students were also filmed during the activity. We used the footage of the students to conduct a stimulated recall where students were asked to tell us about what they were thinking during the activity in the hopes that we would be able to learn about the effect of the core skill in the classroom. Yeah, our results fell into 4 categories. We discovered that at our school, student-to-student dialogue activities increased content understanding, increased academic language use, increased student motivation and engagement, and increased opportunities for assessment.
Wait, what's net force? Okay, so remember when Stuart told us last time that it's when you push like a book at 50 meters?
Maybe we could do 27, then it has to find out, and there'll be a remainder. Yeah, that would be a remainder.
You said, how do we summarize?
Can you elaborate on that last instruction?
So it has to be greater than all the shapes.
Project is called Communicating with Schools. This is giving you credit for being able to communicate.
When you use one of the words in red, they're bonus words. I'd like you with your whiteboard pens to just tick it. You only need to tick it once. You can get a bonus point for using one of the red words.
Was it easier to share your information and share your culture with pictures or writing? How did you divide cookies? So how did you divide cookies? How did you divide pizza?
Well, we've actually started to hold professional development workshops for teachers so that we can share the results and help design student dialogue activities. Actually, at our most recent workshop, 87% of the teachers said that it was very likely or definite that they were going to be implementing those activities. So we're really hoping that this is going to start to impact student achievement and engagement and really just provide another way to access the curriculum.
So we're looking forward to seeing more schools implement the 5 core academic conversation skills. And we've had a lot of interest from schools and teachers to have us come in and do the workshop at their school and hopefully add activities to the iBook.
And we have a website, talkinginclass.com, so we're heading to that too. And it's just exciting to see where this will go. Thanks.
All right, what I would like you to do one more time today is please go ahead and open your video and your microphone. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to think about that video that you just saw, which presents an action research project using video, and just kind of offer up a response to one or more of the prompts that you can see on the screen. I like, I wish, I wonder. So we'll wait for everyone to turn on their audio and video again. Great, thank you everybody. And can we we'll just do a round robin going across the tiles on the top. So we'll start with Carmen. And again, just offer up a response using one of those 3 prompts or more. I like, I wish, I wonder, based on what you just saw with that format for presenting an action research project report.
Oh, So I like the fact that, again, we go back to technology, that they use technology to present the report, and it's, I don't know, visual prompts, and probably work much better than just reading a book, and so that's what I like.
Great, thanks. Mary.
I liked how interactive each of the tasks were, and that just the examples of the students in the classroom, they were always connecting with each other and making some record of what they had connected about and keeping that for later discussion, so that the interaction really is a key bit there.
Great, thank you. Wendy?
Right, so I really like the use of video. It clearly explained the different stages, and I just think it's a tool that is very underutilized. I wish I could work more collaboratively across grade levels. I think that's really powerful. And in terms of their project, I wonder how it could be applied to the early years.
Great, thank you. Sue?
We were wondering where, because they had a project team, were they going to expand that to include more within the middle school? And also whether or not when new staff arrived, how they were going to get them on board with continuing the program, because that's one of the concerns I have with all of these things within divisions or ACS, is that our turnover of staff often means that great stuff gets done and then it kind of sort of skims away a little bit because new staff come in and they don't know about it, but everyone thinks they do. And then suddenly 2 or 3 years down the line, someone says, oh, we haven't done talking in class. And everyone goes, oh, but I thought we'd been doing that for years. So that's about our wonder, I think.
And I like the collegiality of the staff, working together and being able to sort of, bounce ideas off each other and seeing how it works in more than one class.
And that's something that came out of our project, is very much was a whole team effort. And I think the success, therefore, is much easier to, it's much more tangible, and particularly for the students.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything else in terms of I wish, I wonder? I know that those of you answered first, I put you on the spot right away. Does anyone else want to add anything? Okay, so one of the things that I would just say, and one of the things that Wendy pointed out, was the use of video. I think that sometimes when I know that we have kind of provided technical coaching to a lot of action research teams, and one of the things that is always really difficult is going back and recreating events afterward when you haven't had the foresight or haven't thought about doing something as simple as video recording them at the beginning. So I would really encourage you that if you are considering an action research project, you think about the role of creating a video archive, not of everything that you do, but of selected things that you do so that you have that as a video record. One of the things, I didn't know if you caught it because it was very, very fast, but one of the more specialized data collection methods, and it's one of the things that we talk about in some of the kind of other short courses that we do, Jake and Brianna talked about the use of stimulated recall. Stimulated recall involves filming a student during doing an activity and replaying just a clip of that activity for them and asking them to give you direct feedback on what they were doing, what they were thinking, what they were feeling. And one of the really difficult things about any action research project, especially ones that have learning outcomes, is how do you observe learning? You can observe performance, you can observe students doing something, but how do you actually know if that performance represents learning or simply a performance of something that was something that they'd learned before? So you can have a performance without learning, and you can have learning without performance. Yeah, so you could learn something and you might have just taken it in, but you're not actually demonstrating it in what you're doing. Or you could be doing something that really is demonstrating prior knowledge, not new knowledge. And stimulated recall is one of the very, very few tools that can begin to give you fairly accurate insight into exactly what that student is learning based on their expression of what they're feeling. Because one of the things that we know is that oftentimes when students are learning things, they tend to feel a little bit uncomfortable or unsure or questioning or apprehensive. That's the sign that you kind of had hit that edge of that kind of zone of proximal development where it's something they don't know how to do and they're trying to figure it out. And so I just offer that up because we haven't had very many people use that particular methodology, although it's one that, as I said, if you're trying to record or gauge actual learning, it's a really effective tool to use. We saw it used in our lesson study, some of the lesson study things that we've done, and again have developed it as a workshop tool that we actually deliver to people upon request. So just really quickly, we are literally toward the end of the course, the end of the session. Is there anything else that you would like to ask or say at this point? Because in a moment, I'm just going to kind of wrap things up. Okay. As a reminder, like all the other sessions, there was a Learning Log 9.3, which some of you may have been using to record learning points or summarizing your learning from the sessions. The last thing that I want to do is just talk about ways that you can continue to stay connected to the work of the Center for Inspiring Minds or become even more involved in that work. I know that some of you are thinking about or have been working on developing a project proposal for this next year. As a reminder, the deadline for those proposals is April the 25th. And again, as a reminder, we are here to read a proposal draft at any stage. You know, if you feel like you want to share just your research question with us before you go any further, or if you have a whole thing you want to share with us before you submit it, please do that, because we're here to help you make that proposal as good as it can be. We have an idea of what the heads of school are looking for, and we can steer you in a direction to make sure that you've addressed questions that we can anticipate them asking in that review process. Again, I know that all of you are aware at this point that we have this system where teachers who've been here who are kind of beyond the beginning stages, where you have an appraisal every 2 years, that once you're kind of here and established, you have a performance appraisal every 3 years. The years in between are considered professional growth, and action research is one of the methods that you can use in your professional growth. So that next year, if you decide to do action research, but you haven't signed up to do a SIM project, you're not leading a SIM project, we are still here, and we are happy to kind of act as your critical friend. We talked about the importance of improving validity of your project by having a critical friend to just review your work periodically. And we are here and willing and able, and actually, you know, we actually get quite excited when we're asked to do those things outside our regular projects. So again, if you're not going to be leading a project or participating in a SIM project, but you are going to be using action research, please look at us as a potential resource. There will also be opportunities to be a participant in projects that other people are leading. Again, we will announce the projects for next year in mid-May of this year, and we will also announce them again when we come and visit your schools at the beginning of the year to kind of give you a short introduction to what SIM will be working on. Do continue to look for opportunities for workshops in our in-house magazine. We also tend to produce small posters around those events and send them along to each division for posting in the staff rooms on notice boards, although I know that's not the most reliable way to find the information. The most reliable way is to just kind of have a look at the SIM website from time to time, because we do update it on a very regular basis. And again, we do offer a whole series of workshops, courses, and seminars. And next year, what you'll find, what we're going to be talking about when we visit your school at the beginning of the year, is that unlike past years, most of these, almost all of them, are going to be offered on demand. So this course we offered up with a set time and dates, and asked people to come along for whom this time worked. Next year, what we're going to do is that we are going to say, this is what's available. If you can find 5 other people besides yourself, either at your school or across any of the ACS schools, we will provide the training on your timetable, provided we don't have other things, but based on requests and just timings for those things. We started doing that a bit this year and found that that was a much more effective way to be able to work with people, is to work with them on their timetable instead of ours. And again, you'll hear more about that at the beginning of the year. So I want to again thank all of you for participating in the course. Please keep in touch. If you're working on a SIM proposal for this year, please send it to us, and we're happy to help you work on that to make it as good as it could possibly be. Thank you for all of your contributions. Thank you for preparing for class. You guys have been a remarkable cohort in terms of a group of people who've consistently been prepared to discuss the topics each week. So thank you for doing that. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Have a good afternoon.